Okay, class. So our lecture today is going to be on group process and group intervention. So last week we talked a bit about individual process and individual intervention. Let's recap a little bit and think about what exactly is the process. So when we're looking at that circle image with the outside being the OT domain, right? That's like the purple area. Now we're moving into the greenish area on that circle. And that's talking about the OT process. The OT process refers to the evaluation, the intervention, implementation, and planning your intervention, as well as your outcomes. So we did last week part of the evaluation process, which is the occupational profile. From that in lab last week, we started to look at people's occupational profile as well as their outcomes and their goals. And you guys started to develop what you thought would be a good intervention for that person. And I thought you guys did a great job and came up with really good interventions for the case studies that you were presented with. When we're looking at groups, the process is very similar with a little bit of a difference just because we're not focusing on one human and we're focusing on more than one human, right? That's what makes up a group. So when you're looking at your OTPF, there's going to be different things listed as far as like examples when it comes to intervention. And there's going to be individual, group, and population. I want you guys to consider what's the difference between a group and a population. So as we start to go through this PowerPoint a little bit, we're going to keep reflecting back on the difference between a group and a population, because that is going to make it a little bit easier when you are in your next semester and your summer semester, and you have to start thinking about developing interventions to focus towards groups and populations. A lot of times, what an occupational therapist does from a population perspective is by serving on like AOTA or like different foundations or companies so that you can serve on a platform and you can make changes at a population level. That could include providing education to somebody that has the ability to impact a larger population, putting handouts in a doctor's office. That's going to provide information to a population, as opposed to a group, which is more than one person, but it doesn't necessarily cover a large enough group to be considered a population, if that makes sense. So let's start to go through this PowerPoint slide. As you guys go through this and you're listening to it, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Don't hesitate to text me or whatever it may be. Send me an email if you feel like there's something you're not understanding and we need to touch base on a little bit more. Okay, so group process and group intervention. These are the ACODE standards that we're going to be going through in this lecture. These are the learning objectives. Okay, so first we want to start with the definition of a group. What is a group? A group is an aggregate of people who share a common purpose that can only be achieved through collaboration. Also, organized systems of interrelated, interactive, and interdependent individuals. So every person in a group is their own sole individual. Typically, to be a part of a group versus a population, a group is organized. So you all kind of have a common purpose. An example of a group could be a bunch of people at a senior center. Like it's their choice to go to the senior center. They all go to the senior center so that they can participate in different occupations such as social engagement, leisure. It could also be like a soccer team. They all have the same goal of playing soccer or interest in playing soccer, winning a game, etc. There are different types of groups and they all serve different purposes, right? Like a group of like runners, a group of people that go to yoga together. They don't have to be centered around an activity like a physical activity, but they do share a common purpose. So in order to be an effective member of that group, you should have the same purpose of the other people in that group. Whereas a population is just a very large mass of people that generally spans, it doesn't have to be in the same area, it can kind of span like a large area, and they don't necessarily have to have the same purpose. So occupational therapy group intervention. So they are provided in a variety of settings, including schools, hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, some places called these SNFs, independent living centers. So the difference between a skilled nursing facility and an independent living center, you have to have a pretty high level of independence to live in an independent living center, as opposed to a skilled nursing facility where you live there, but you often need more hands-on assistance to complete activities. Psychiatric services as well as daycare programs. So daycare doesn't necessarily refer to only children. There's usually like adult daycare programs. I believe when you guys are doing one of your level ones, which is in a group setting, there is an adult daycare program for adults that have developmental delay. A lot of times there is also like a daycare program for people that have a traumatic brain injury. So you'll have like a group of people with traumatic brain injury. They go and they participate in these activities while their family members are at work. So group interventions provide the opportunity to develop task skills and interpersonal interaction skills. Okay, the group process. So the group process is the here and now experience in the group that describes how the group is functioning, the quality of the relationships between and among group members, and with the leader, the emotional experiences and reactions of the group and the group's strongest desires and fears. So moment to moment group interaction. So there's going to be a bunch of different interactions going on in a group as compared to like an individual therapist interaction. In that interaction, there's only two people, whereas in a group, there's more than two people. So there's a lot of other interactions that you have to be cognizant of when you are providing therapy to a group. So there's member to member. So for example, let's just take a look at our class, right? So our class is a group. Member to member is going to be the students in the class having relationships and interacting with each other. So while the leader, in this case, that would be me as the professor, is sitting in front of the class, directing the class in different educational type opportunities and learning experiences, I'm interacting. So it's leader to member, member to leader. So you guys respond to me, I respond to you, and then you guys also are responding to each other. There's also subgroups within a group. So one way to think about this is elementary school dances. There are always little pockets of humans. Like there's the boys section, there's the girls section, there's the nerd section sitting over in the bleachers. No, I'm just kidding. That's probably not accurate anymore. Maybe it is, but still. So think about how within a large group, there tends to be like cliques of people that stick together, i.e. the Corinthians. Then there's the group as a whole. So the group as a whole includes the leader and all of the members, including all of those little subgroups. There's also the engagement in occupation, right? So that's a transactional experience. So while we're engaging in the occupation is also engaging with us. And then we also want to think of the culture of the environment. So the context is also going to have a very, very large role in how the group proceeds and the success of the group. Let's think about like a yoga studio. So if we are doing yoga and it's on the side of a highway, and while you're supposed to be doing like your calming breathing exercises, there's a huge truck going by. Like the culture of the environment is that it should be like a very quiet, zen, relaxing place. However, if somebody's talking in yoga, they're messing up the culture of the environment. So there's a lot of like norms that should be accepted within a group interaction. Characteristics of groups. So there's the group context and the climate. So kind of like we just talked about with the yoga room. If you're doing hot yoga, you want to make sure that the climate is warmer. If you're in a learning environment, typically they try to make the environment a little cooler because that actually is more conducive to learning. You also want to think about anything else that could be impacting the success of the group. Typically in groups that we also want to make sure that we're setting boundaries, right? So things that are accepted, things that are not accepted. There's also usually some type of membership in order to be in a group. So whether that is like you're paying dues, there's like an expectation that you come a certain number of times a week. There's some type of membership that kind of includes you in the group. So within the group, there's also roles, just like there is for individuals. Everybody has a specific role in the group. There should be group cohesiveness, otherwise the group may not be as successful as we are kind of hoping it will be. There's also group norms and group goals. So task and social emotional roles. So some of the task roles could be like in order to have a successful group, you're going to have like an initiator. So that could be a leader. Then you're also going to have a contributor. So that could be like a follower. There's information seekers and information givers, right? Professor versus student. There's opinion seekers versus opinion givers, usually elaborators, a coordinator, somebody that like kind of sets the entire group up and makes sure everything's running smoothly, an evaluator who's kind of like looking at the group to see if there's anything that needs to be changed or anything that needs to be altered to make it better. An energizer is typically the person that kind of like gets everyone engaged. So they're the one that's jumping up like, okay, it's time to do this group activity. Like, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be so much fun. Like, you look like you're interested in that. Come on over. And then there's the procedural technician. So that could be somebody that is like a higher up that's just kind of like making sure everything's running smoothly and like no rules or anything are being broken. Aside from like the task roles, there's also social emotional roles. So there's going to be the encourager who could be similar to the energizer, right? Follower, harmonizer, compromiser. If there's like a disagreement among members in the groups, there's typically like somebody who steps up to be the compromiser. The gatekeeper is typically the person that determines who can be in the group and who cannot be in the group. There's also the standard setter. So that's kind of the person that sets the rules of the group and make sure that those are being followed, as well as a group observer. So they may not necessarily participate in the group, but they're kind of there to give feedback on the things that are going on in the group. So there's 4 functions of group leadership. There always has to be a leader in a group. There can't always just be followers. Otherwise, there's really nobody to facilitate the successful interaction and kind of roles of the group. So there's 4 functions of a group leader, which is emotional activation. So you want to make sure that you're eliciting feelings and facilitating emotional expression, challenging and confronting as necessary. So again, let's kind of reflect back to the class, right? When we're sitting in the classroom, I'm going to ask questions, but I'm also going to challenge why you're giving me the answer that you're giving me. I want you to reflect on why you're choosing that answer and kind of like process through and problem solve like why that is what you decided was your answer for the question. Group leaders should also be caring. So they want to offer support, concern, and acceptance, kind of like the open door policy, right? So if you have anything that you have going on, like I want to make sure that you feel comfortable coming and having a conversation with me about it. If your group leader doesn't present themselves as caring, then that can make for a challenging group dynamic. They also want to have meaning attribution. So that's providing clarification, explanation, and interpretation. So reflecting back to that active listening that we talked about last week, like you want to make sure that like you're attributing meaning to what people are saying and kind of reflecting back. So like, this is what I'm hearing. Is this what you're actually saying? A good group leader will always be providing attribution and meaning to what other people say, because nobody's going to want to stay in a group where they're not feeling like they're being interpreted or understood or being cared for or being challenged. I mean, if you are entering a group to like be the best that you can be, if you're not being challenged to be that, are you going to continue to stick around? They're also going to make sure that they are using executive functions. So managing time, setting limits, recommending strategies and procedures. If a group leader does not have good executive function skills, then everything's going to kind of go awry, because if they're not managing their time, they're not showing up to the group on time, they're not bringing the items that they need to have at the group for everything to run smoothly. If they're not setting limits and rules and boundaries, then everybody's just going to kind of run amok and do whatever they want to do, right? So they're kind of the one that has to make sure that everything is, the I's are getting dotted and the T's are getting crossed to make sure that everything's flowing smoothly. So there's different types of leadership styles. Three of the types of styles mentioned here are directive leader. So that's the kind of leader that selects therapeutic activities and structures to the group to meet the goals. So they're kind of like, okay, do this to achieve this. Facilitative leaders, they tend to garner support of group members, guide group decision making, and serve as a resource person and an educator. So they're not telling you what to do, they're more providing you with information so that the group can make decisions on their own. By kind of like, facilitating, which makes sense because it's facilitative, right? They're engaged in the group decision-making process, but they're not making the decision for the group. Whereas advisory is a leader that offers expertise as needed or requested by the group members. So that's more of like a leader that kind of touches in just to make sure everything's going okay, see if you guys need help with anything, and then gives advice if you want it. So they do not provide structure or predetermine goals for an advisory leader. There's 4 stages of group development. So a group takes time to kind of grow and get all of its members and to be like successfully functioning, right? So step 1 is the forming stage. So that's when you establish group roles. So thinking about the roles that we just talked about, the task roles and the social emotional roles, right? Everybody's getting different roles. The storming is conflict arising from resistance to group influence. So typically after you start to form a group, in order for the group to start functioning like very smoothly, like a well-oiled machine, there's going to be storming. Not everybody is going to agree with everything that's being put on the table for the creation of this group. So as conflicts start to arise, the forming stage is going to help because everybody's going to have those different roles and the conflict is going to be resolved with the group having a little bit more of a founded structure. Norming is the 3rd stage. So that's discovering ways to work together. So post-conflict, we're kind of now all figuring out how to work together so that we can be successful in the creation of this group, right? And then performing. So flexible ways of working together to achieve goals. Now the group is formed, they are working well together, and now we're going to like work towards achieving our goals. So a separate example of group development can be seen here. This is straight out of the Willard and Spackman textbook. There's the exploratory stage, the transition stage, action stage, and termination stage. So those 4 stages relate very similarly to the forming, storming, norming, performing. So you can kind of go off of either of those. I would try to be familiar with both because they do have very similar bullet points in each stage. It's just really the name that's a little different. Okay, so how can we use groups to evaluate client function? So there are specific global mental functions that are readily apparent in group situations, and those include attention, memory, perception, thought, temperament, and personality, energy, and drive. So while someone is participating in a group, i.e. school is a very good example, especially for children. When you're an occupational therapist in a school, you would typically have a child study team evaluation, right? Well, prior to the child study team evaluation, which helps to develop whether a child is going to have an IEP or a 504 plan, an occupational therapist often will just do a consultation on a child, which literally involves sitting and just watching the child participate in a day. Like, so what do they look like when they're sitting in school? Like, are they able to sit in their chair? Are they able to concentrate? What's their energy like? what's their temperament, etc. So school is a really great example to kind of picture like how you can evaluate one human within a group setting without actually having to do like a formal assessment. Just through your clinical observation skills, you can pick up on a lot of these things mentioned here, like attention and memory and perception, solely through just observation. So intervention groups in occupational therapy. So groups in occupational therapy provide occupation-based experience promoting adaptation. It's typically natural environments that are providing support and social needs. You can also facilitate competence in ADLs and groups, and you can also provide real-life opportunities enhancing the occupational nature, fulfilling the social demand. So there's a lot of different groups that you can run in as an occupational therapist, right? The main focus of the groups, though, is that you still want to make sure that you're maintaining occupation-based experience. As occupational therapists, if we're not using an occupation-based experience or an occupation-based intervention, we're really not staying within our scope of practice. We need to bring everything back to the occupation because that's our job as an occupational therapist, right? You also want to make sure that like you are in an environment that's providing support and social needs. So if you have a group of 20 people and you don't have the space for that, that's something you need to take into consideration. You want to make sure that the environment facilitates the ability for these group members to achieve the goals that they're in the group to achieve. Groups do provide a very good way for humans to participate in that social aspect. I mean, as humans, we are meant to be social beings. That's just the nature of being a human. And we want to make sure that if we are participating in groups, or as an OT, you're running a group, that you're facilitating the ability for your clients to be able to access all of those things that they're coming to the group to be able to access, like social participation. Types of occupational therapy groups include client-centered groups, developmental groups, task-oriented groups, and functional groups. So all groups have a purpose and they all have their own goals that you're working toward. So what are these types of groups? A client-centered group is when the client participation is facilitated in all aspects of the group process. So the therapist creates an environment that facilitates change. Therapy is usually flexible and individualized to the client needs. And the goal is to enable and empower clients to address their own occupational performance issues. Intervention focuses on the client environment occupation relationship. So PEO, right? We're using PEO to kind of drive client-centered groups. An example of client-centered groups could be like group therapy in like a rehab gym. So the purpose of all of these clients coming to the group is to participate in some part of therapy to kind of increase their ability to engage in the occupation of their choice, right? A lot of times we also have client-centered groups in the hospital for like stroke survivor group, spinal cord injury survivor group, or something along those lines, where you're meeting people that are going through a similar trauma as you. And so therefore you already have a commonality, a common ground to stand on. You both are working towards accepting this huge change in your life, and that automatically gives you kind of like a common goal. So you want to make sure that no matter what group your client-centered group is focusing on, no matter what they're focusing on, you're creating an environment that facilitates their ability to focus on that. Okay, then developmental groups. So some of the examples in the textbook are a parallel group, a project group. That project group is kind of similar to what you guys have been doing in class, or what you are going to be doing when it comes to like building the occupation-based kits. Parallel group is typically when everybody is doing like similar things, but they're not necessarily doing them together. So a lot of times you'll see this with young children that don't necessarily have the social skills to interact yet. They might all be playing with Legos and therefore have to have some type of interaction, because if the Lego I want is on the other side of that small child. I have to figure out how to be able to get it. So there's interaction with a commonality of playing with the Legos, but it's not necessarily a give and take interaction per se. That's usually at the lowest level of a developmental group. And then as you like mature and you grow, you kind of like advance through these different levels that you'll see here. As we kind of grow and mature as adults, you kind of advance the groups that you're able to participate in, if that makes sense. Task-oriented groups are groups in which the intervention provide a shared work experience that facilitates the integration of thinking, feeling, and behavior, and it provides a structure for interaction as well as opportunities for problem solving and skill development. So most task-oriented groups are like groups that have a very specific goal in mind, and the sole purpose of that group is to achieve that goal. So an example of that could be kind of people joining a group to build houses for like low income areas in like the Middle East or something like that. The purpose of that group is to like give back to the community as well as to finish the task of building a house. So if you think about that, that could also be a group in a hospital, or it could be let's see, like a group project in school or something along those lines, where the sole purpose of your group is to achieve the goal that you guys have been tasked to achieve. So some of the task groups and learn skills. So there's skills that can be learned during a group setting. What kind of skills are those? So you want to make sure that in a group setting, some of the skills that you're learning is like appropriate use of tools and materials. You should be learning like your willingness to engage in doing tasks. Otherwise, you're no longer going to be invited to be in the group, really. Sustained interest in the task, ability to follow demonstrated oral and written direction. So these are all skills that can be learned in a group setting, but also really need to be had in order to successfully participate in a group setting. If you don't have all of the skills in the box and you don't have the capacity to be able to learn the skills in this box, then your participation in a group is going to be a little more challenged. And then finally, there is activity groups. So activity groups are frequently designed to build a positive self-concept, manage and express emotions constructively, and improve communication skills among group members. Functional groups, there's typical actions in functional groups. So there's purposeful actions. So these are meaningful for individuals and the group as a whole. There's self-initiated actions. So a group member takes initiative verbally or non-verbally. Spontaneous actions, actions that occur in the here and now without kind of like planning it out beforehand. And then group-centered actions. So those are actions of group members that are interdependent. So let's talk a little bit about implementing intervention groups in occupational therapy. I would strongly suggest taking a picture of this slide or kind of marking this page in your Willard and Spackman, because this Coles 7-step group process is going to be very important when you are in your level ones and you have to implement group interventions. I believe you will have to do at least 2 group interventions. If I remember correctly, it might be 2 or 3. And then you have to write an entire group protocol, and you have to kind of present your group, and you're going to do your group, and an occupational therapist will come to your fieldwork site and observe you. And part of you getting a good grade on the group that you have implemented is that you successfully completed all 7 of these steps. So step 1 is introduction. So you're going to introduce yourself, whether there's warm-up exercises, and you're going to kind of explain the purpose of the group clearly, right? So what I want you guys to do in lab, we'll talk about it briefly in the next lecture on Wednesday, is I want you guys to kind of like come up with an idea for a group and walk me through all of these different steps. So I'm running a group on walking dogs. And I'm gonna like introduce myself. Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm an occupational therapist. This is like the dog walking group. I'm gonna have everyone introduce themselves. A, B, C, D, all introduce themselves. Like the first thing that we're gonna do is I just want you guys to kind of like get your dog on your leash. We're gonna stand here, like loosen up your muscles. We're walking about a mile or two. I want to make sure that you guys are all handling your dogs, like make sure you're paying attention to your dog while we're all walking. This isn't like time to be just talking with your neighbor and not really like paying attention to your animal, because all animals are unpredictable. The purpose of this group is really to work on like your handling skills with your dog. So what we're going to do is like, this is our first session. We'll have like 5 sessions after this, like sporadically throughout the next couple months. And we're really starting to work on our handling with our dog so that we can walk our dog better outside. So that is step 1, introduction, right? Step 2 is the activity. So timing not more than 1/3 of the group session. So it's simple and a short activity. Consider the therapeutic goals to be accomplished by the activity. Consider the physical and mental capabilities of the group members. So this is what you're actually doing. So in the terms of walking the dog, the activity is actually walking the dog. You might have to modify or adapt what's currently happening depending on who's in your group. So say we're walking the dogs and one person's dog is like going insane and won't continue walking. As the person leading that group, I'm going to go over to that person and be like, oh, why don't we try and change where your hand is on the leash? Why don't we try to change like the way that the leash is connected to their collar? Why don't we move you to the front of the line versus the back of the line? So thinking about ways that you might have to adapt participation to allow everyone in the group to successfully participate. You also want to make sure that you're presenting the instructions clearly. If you are doing like an arts and crafts activity, you always want to provide an example or a demonstration. So if we're doing like a physical activity group, I'm going to do the physical activity before I expect somebody else to be able to do it. If we're doing arts and crafts, I'm going to bring in an example of what it's expected to look like at the end product. Kind of like if anybody's been to a paint and sip, you know how they like paint the part first and then have you do it, paint the next part and then have you do it. A lot of times, unless this group has been run many a times, most people are not going to know how to participate and successfully complete all of the steps of the group. So the like demonstration completion tends to be a really good way to continue to have people's sustained attention and task participation through the entirety of the activity. Step 3 is going to be sharing. So after the completion of the group, you kind of want to go around and be like, so what did you think about that activity? Is there anything anybody wants to say and like to kind of tell me how the experience went or what they thought about the experience? If nobody wants to, you want to make sure that you go around and like just call people out, kind of like my spinning wheel. If you do not get anybody to share, you will lose points on this, but not only lose points, you want to think about like if people aren't sharing or you're not getting feedback on the group, you're never going to be able to determine what went well and what went poorly. And so when you want to kind of reflect back and alter your group so that it can be more successful next time, you need to have the sharing of other people's like experiences, right? Step 4 is processing. So make sure each group member has an opportunity to share, acknowledge each person's contribution verbally or non-verbally. So this is where we're going to start to use that active listening. So the group member shares, I had a really hard time controlling my dog, but I really liked being able to get out and walk and be around other people. My processing of that would be, so it sounds like you had a great time walking your dog and you really enjoyed being out here, but maybe we need to spend a little bit more time next week working on like how you can hold the leash and facilitate your dog walking a little bit better. Does that kind of sum up what you were saying? They would tell you yes or no so that you can kind of make sure that you're fully understanding what their experience was. After you've kind of gone around and talked to several group members and gotten several group members' experience and kind of processed their experience, you can kind of sum up the group experience in a few principles. So point out like or similar responses, point out contrasts or differences, and state something that was learned from the experience. So I noticed a couple of you said that this was a little bit tricky controlling your dog, but a couple of you also said that it was really great just to be able to be out in the outdoors and interacting with other people. I think that part of this experience, which was a really good takeaway, was that we all can keep working on leash handling and walking with our dogs, but we also want to make sure that we're taking time for ourselves to get out and spend time in the outdoors and whatever it may be. So like 1 to 2 principles learned from the experience. Step 6 is application. So you want to verbalize the meaning or significance of the experience, discuss how the principles learned can be applied to everyday life, relate the experience to issues or problems of members, and use concrete examples. So if you're doing like an arts and crafts activity, and the arts and crafts activity is relating to emotions or something along those lines, you would kind of again go back to like the purpose of this activity was X, Y, and Z. Some of the things that we did today, like you can do at home on your own so that you can continue to work on like processing these emotions and working with your mental health or working with your dog if that was the group. And then you can kind of like relate the experience again to like other issues and stuff that they might have. Like if you know anybody else that's has issues like working on their dog, maybe you can help them with some of the stuff that you learned here. Or like you can use the example of the arts and crafts for like mental health and being like, so like this is one way that you can work on processing emotions. Some other ways could be journaling or whatever it may be, meditation, and kind of like giving people concrete examples of how they can incorporate what you taught them in the group into their everyday life without you having to be there. Make sure that you kind of are, at the end, you reach step 7, which is summary. So you want to emphasize the most important aspects of the group, review the goals, the content, and the process of the group, reinforce the group's learning, and thank the members for their participation. Oops. Okay. So when you're developing group protocols, an intervention plan for specific populations or an outline for planning, these are the things that you're going to consider. So just like you were going to take a picture of this previous slide over here, you want to take a picture of these slides as well. When you are writing a group protocol, like you're literally going to bullet at the top, like you're going to write dog walking group, underlined, bold. Then you're going to write group members and size. So that's going to be like 12 members participated. Session format is going to be like what you guys did. So for like participated in session outside, working on dog handling skills for an hour or whatever it might be. Areas of occupation, performance patterns, or performance skills addressed. So if we're talking about walking the dog, the areas of occupation would be IADL, caring for animal. You could also put it under like leisure. You could also put it, because the other people are there, you could put it under social participation if that's why you're participating in it. Performance patterns addressed would be, so that's like the roles, rituals, habits, routines. If you've addressed any of those, we're going to list them down. So for the dog walking example, could be like a dog mom or a dog dad. It could also be a friend. It could be wife or husband, mom. It could be any of those things if they're playing a role. And then the performance skills addressed. So the performance skills are that long list of all the things that we kind of talked about a few weeks ago. So those are like the mental cognitive pieces that are necessary, the strength that's necessary, the attention pieces that are necessary, kind of all those like bodily functions and structures that you might need to be able to participate in this task. So similarly, when you guys are doing that, occupation-based kit, you're going to be also assessing like the performance skills that are needed, right? So the motor skills that are needed, the social skills that are needed, the cog skills that are needed, or the processing skills that are needed. We also want to talk about the intervention approach. So not just the intervention itself, because the intervention itself is going to be the area of occupation that we talked about before, unless you're doing like a preparatory activity or an advocacy, but 9 times out of 10, especially for a group membership or like a group intervention session, you're going to really only be working on like an occupation or an activity, because you really want to get people up and moving and engaged. So then your intervention approach would be one of those 5 approaches that we talked about. So create, promote, establish, restore, prevent, adapt or modify. And there's one more and I can't remember what it is. Maintain, maybe. So make sure that you're trying to keep in mind of how you're going to implement this intervention and what approach you're going to use. You're going to also make another bullet for the time and place. So Saturday, November, whatever, at 2 p.m. The place is at the dog walking park, wherever that may be, Newark, New Jersey. Then you're going to give a step-by-step description of the therapeutic activity that you're going to be completing. So for the dog walking, there's going to be a lot of steps for that, right? I want you guys to think about when you're writing a step-by-step description, it's going to be very similar to how Dr. Grasso had you write step-by-step for your brushing your hair, washing your face activity. You want to make sure that you're kind of explaining this step-by-step through the lens of this person has never completed this before. So literally every single step needs to be written down so that if you were to write a group protocol and I took it, I could easily implement it without having to ask you any questions. You want to make sure that you're writing down the role of the group leader. So typically you're going to have a group leader and then a couple people assisting you. Is the group leader doing something different than the other people? If so, we need to write down what they're doing and how they're kind of directing the other people to help them. What supplies and costs do you need? So if you're doing an arts and crafts play activity, like what kinds of things do you need to complete this? How much is it going to cost? If you develop a group that's going to cost $150, like I want to be able to look at the protocol and see it cost $150 and know that before I decide to embark on doing this group. You also want to write down the environmental setup. Are you inside? Are you outside? What's the lighting like? How do you need everything set up? Like if you're doing the dog walking, you want to make sure that all of the people and their dogs are spread out enough that the dogs aren't close enough to have any type of negative interaction. Do they need like the little boxes that the dogs stand on before they go and do whatever they have to do? You want to make sure that you're very descriptive in your environmental setup, because that's only going to help you be more successful in implementing the group. Then any potential safety issues that could occur, you want to make note of those. Grading and adapting the activity, which we're going to talk about in a couple weeks, but we have briefly touched on like upgrades and downgrades, right? So like if the group is not running smoothly for one human, what is some ways we can make it easier or we can make it more challenging? And then we just also want to look at evaluation strategies. So how are you planning on looking at this group to determine if it was successful or not successful? How are you evaluating the success of the group? So make sure that you're making a note of the strategies you're using, whether it's just observation, that's fine. If you're doing like a survey, like pre and post survey, you would kind of include that information in the evaluation strategies here. So we always want to have in our back pocket possible ways to deal with problem behaviors when, I mean, this can be applicable to individuals, but it's also applicable in like a bigger context in a group setting, right? So as there are typical norms for a group setting, we also want to be mindful of the fact that sometimes in groups, there is going to be a member or so that is not participating in the way that we deem to be acceptable. And so how do we kind of employ different ways of solving these disruptive behaviors? So I'm not going to go through all of these. I think that some of them are going to be like learn on the fly while you're doing it. But I do think that this is a really great chart to put in here just so that you can reflect back to it and like look at the example of how somebody did deal with a disruptive behavior. So if you think about I know somebody had mentioned when they were doing their occupational profile that the person would not stop talking. And so like an example here is like interrupting other group members, excessive talking, like what can you do about that? So you can like design structured activities, ask questions that require answers from all group members, teach and model methods of taking turns in conversations. Sometimes you actually have to say that, oh, I'm sorry, it's their turn to talk, but when they're done expressing what they want to say, we'll make sure that we come to you next. Teach and model methods of taking turns in a conversation. So that's an example of that. You can also redirect the client's attention to group goals, activities, or discussion. So if they're kind of going on, you can be like, listen, I really want to hear the story, but I also want to make sure that you're getting everything done that you need to get done in this session. And so why don't we like put a pin in this conversation, and you can keep working on your arts and crafts because you really need to finish your arts and crafts so we can kind of talk about everything at the end of the session. So just make sure that you're kind of going through and just taking a look at these in your spare time. Just because this will be more pertinent when you are actually out in the field and at this point in your OT career, we're not really dealing with this because we're not really dealing with in-person interactions yet. Okay, so then the intentional relationship model is one of the models that kind of drives group participation. So there's a bunch of different interpersonal characteristics that a client needs to have to engage successfully and like optimally in a group. So some of those interpersonal characteristics are going to be communication style, the person's capacity for trust, a person's need for control, their affect, capacity to receive feedback. So we all know people that are like very defensive and they're just not good at receiving feedback. Response to human diversity, orientation toward relating. So like, are they able to relate to other humans? We want to make sure we know their preference for touch. There are a lot of people who are very strongly against being touched in any capacity, and capacity for I'm not saying that word. Reciprocity. I think that is how you say it. So knowing how that each client is a very different and individual human, and all of these characteristics of every client is going to be brought to the table when you're engaging in a group setting. So while you're engaging in this group setting and you are building an intervention and implementing an intervention for a group, we just need to be cognizant that despite the fact that it is a group is consisting of individuals, and each of those people may have a different communication style or may have like a different response to change and challenge. And so we need to be able and willing to address these changes and these differences in the way people interact amongst each other and with you in a group. So there's also some differences that we want to consider among treatment. So confidentiality, managing group boundaries, transference, and documentation. So documenting a group is actually very different than documenting an individual session, which you'll get into. And I believe the fieldwork coordinator provides further information on like group protocols and documentation before you go out into your level ones. But you want to make sure that like it is not your place to kind of talk about people's diagnoses or anything that you might know about a group member in front of the group without first confirming that it's okay with the group member that information is shared. Like there is still HIPAA, and even though you are in a group setting, there are still certain things that should not be shared with all of the members of the group unless it has been okayed by the person whose information it is. We also want to manage group boundaries. So let's limit like physical contact if that's something that we want to be we should be concerned about. There's still going to be boundaries in groups that people should kind of follow the rules and things that are put in place. And then, like I said, you'll talk a little bit more about the documentation before you go out on your level ones. Okay, so this is, you guys don't have a group protocol assignment. I'm going to actually screenshot this and upload it onto Canvas as a separate document, because for lab, I want to make sure that this is something that you guys feel comfortable going through. I know that you have not been fully introduced to all of the different theories yet. I know you guys touched base on PEO, but I'm trying to remember. I feel like you went through MoHo, but I'm not 100% sure. If not, by Wednesday, you should have gone through at least one or two more, I believe, in Dr. Balog's class. So I want you to start thinking about like how you could make a group protocol, kind of going back and looking at this developing group protocol slides here. And we'll take a look at them. One thing that you can use to help you is like the AOTA's area of practice. So there's a bunch of different areas of practice. I know we've touched based on some of them, like whether that is pediatric inpatient, pediatric outpatient, school settings, hospital settings, skilled nursing facilities. There's community settings, there's community centers, there's academics, research. There's a bunch of different practice areas. So like take a look at AOTA's practice areas. And while you're looking at those practice areas, I want you guys to begin to think about like, okay, if I was working in this practice area, what might be a beneficial group that I could run in this practice area? An example is like when I worked at Kessler, we had multiple groups. One group was like an upper extremity group. That was all we called it, upper extremity group. And then to be in the group, you had to have an upper extremity impairment, usually post-stroke, and you had to be able to do certain things with your arm in order to be in the group, because it was only one therapist, like 5 patients, and how each person in that group works on different things to strengthen and improve their upper extremity post-stroke. So that's an example of like one group, and then I would write an entire protocol on that group, right? There is no right or wrong for the group protocol. It's not being graded. I just want to make sure that you guys have some exposure to this prior to going into it next semester or the semester after that. So I did include this in here as well, just so you guys have it to refer back to. So all of the theories that guide practices are listed up here. I know you have not, oh goodness, I'm so sorry. I know you have not gone through all of these yet, but I just wanted to put it here for you to make sure that you guys have it there to kind of refer back to. Because when you are doing this group protocol, I want to make sure that like you're choosing the theoretic perspective that you're going to use to kind of drive the protocol. So again, going back to the development of the group protocol, when it says the intervention approach, I want to make sure that you have intervention approach, which is that create, promote, adapt, establish, restore, prevent, maybe advocacy. I think that might be the other one. Write down that, but also tell me like why you're choosing that intervention approach, which is going to be your theoretical framework, right? So which theory is driving you to pick that approach and to build this group? You guys can do this in groups 2, 3. That's totally fine with me. If you want to, I can make, I don't know if I can make a way for you to upload it on Canvas, but you can email it to me and I'll take a look at it and give you some feedback before class on Monday. Next Monday. So again, kind of go through the AOTA's practice area to kind of give you some idea of like what you can do your group protocol under. So whether it's going to be, some of the practice areas are actually right over here. So you could be looking at children and youth, health and wellness, mental health, rehab and disability. So that's going to be kind of what I was talking about in the hospital. Productive aging. So that's aging in place. like we talked about in Dr. Bayluck's class, as well as in my class a couple of weeks ago, and then work in industry. So like return to work, or it could also be like adapting the work setting, like ergonomically, so that people can be more successful in working and not injuring themselves or their bodies. So again, use this to kind of guide that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the lab presentation. And here is some examples of group protocols. So if you guys want to take a look at them, go ahead and click on a couple of these links that are posted into the PowerPoint presentation, just to give yourself an idea of some things that you can start kind of familiarizing yourself with. So that is it for this presentation. I will upload this later, and then if you guys have any questions, just make sure that you let me know and feel free to reach out. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week.